There's a lot of advice online about filtration options for medium and large tanks, but nano tanks are a whole different story. Because they are so small, popular options like the Seachem Tidal range and many canister filters are simply too large and too powerful, making them unsuitable. For today's video, I'm going to be focusing on the filters that I personally use in my 25 litre or 6.6 US gallon tanks, so you can find an option that works well for your particular nano setup. And before I go any further, I just want to say that none of these are sponsored and I bought every filter with my own money. The Nicrew Slim hang-on back filter is one of the best options I've found for nano tanks. I've bought several of these now, and after using some of them for 8 months they are still performing well without issue. One advantage is their low price, which makes them perfect for beginners who usually start with smaller nano tanks to help keep their costs low. These filters are also very quiet, provided you regularly top up the water in your tank to counter evaporation to the base of the spillway, but the water can get a little noisy as it returns into the tank if you leave your water level to drop. Because of their tiny size, these filters fit perfectly onto nano tank setups, and I'm using them on tanks as large as 8 US gallons or 30 litres without any issues with the cycle. The flow rate can be adjusted using the control dial, but I usually keep mine on full power without issue in my nano tanks. Each filter comes with a pre-filter sponge included to cover the intake, protecting baby shrimp, snails and fry from getting sucked into the filter. In my tanks I often see baby Neocaridina shrimp grazing on the detritus that builds up on the sponge, and they can move around freely without getting trapped by the water intake suction. For media, you can use the cartridge system that's included and replace them as required, or you can use a custom media setup like I do. The cartridges combine filter floss, sponge and activated carbon, but because it's all one unit you have to replace everything whenever the filter floss on the cartridge clogs. Depending on your stocking options and what you feed, this can happen surprisingly quickly, making this an expensive option over time. Instead, I use 30 ppi foam and filter floss that I cut down to size using the included cartridge as a template. A single piece of 30 ppi foam can last for years, and a single sheet of filter floss can be cut multiple times for such a small filter, which will save a lot of money in the long run. Maintenance for this filter is straightforward too, and it usually only takes about 5 minutes a month, but many people unfortunately skip the maintenance, resulting in problems. If you're in the United States, you may see an Amazon warning about frequent returns for this product and notice a lot of 1-star reviews complaining about leaks. Now, some of these filters may have manufacturing issues, but I honestly believe that most of the leaks happen when the media gets clogged and people aren't keeping up with maintenance. If the water flow is blocked due to clogged media, the filter will fill up because the pump is running at its regular power and it doesn't know that the media is clogged. This means that the water level inside of the filter will slowly start to increase until it overflows and starts to leak. If you're using the cartridges, changing the media once per month as Nicrew recommends on the sale page should be able to reduce the chances of this happening. With a custom media setup like mine, I actually replace the filter floss weekly in some of my tanks where I feed leaves to my shrimp because they release a lot of leaf particles into the water and clog the floss regularly. But in my other tanks where the shrimp are just left to eat the leftover fish food, I usually replace the filter floss in those about once per month to prevent any clogging. I have a quick and easy way that you can check for clogging too, and you slightly reduce the water flow on the filter so there's a small gap under the lid between the water surface and the air, and if that gap disappears due to the water level increasing, you know that it's time to clean or replace your filter media. It's also worth rinsing the pre-filter sponge once a month to clean it, as it can collect a surprising amount of waste and debris which will slow the pump on the filter and limit water flow. But overall, the Nicrew Slim filter is an excellent cheap filter that works very well in my nano tanks, especially when you maintain it correctly, and that's why I bought so many of them. Now some people may be presuming that the second recommendation would be a sponge filter, but it's actually an undergravel filter. I know that these are not for everyone, but they are cheap, very easy to set up, cycle quickly and very low maintenance. I've been running this one without issue for almost 4 months now, and even when I had to transfer 60 Neocaridina shrimp into the tank, it didn't see any ammonia spikes or any nitrite problems or anything like that. The filter just held the cycle. Just like any air-powered filter, you may hear noise from the bubbling on the water's surface as the air returns, but a lot of the noise will usually come from the air pump. However, modern piezoelectric air pumps like the one that I'm using on this are almost silent, so the only sound you really notice is the gentle popping of the air bubbles on the surface, which I actually find quite relaxing. Undergravel filters do come in a wide range of different sizes for different aquariums, but I picked the smallest Penplax model designed for 10-gallon tanks, and I only used one of the filter plates in my nano tank setup and it works flawlessly. Because nano tanks are shorter than most other aquarium sizes, I did have to cut the return tube down to size so it would fit easily, but this is easy to do because it's made of thin plastic. I decided to keep it as simple as possible and use a regular standard undergravel filter setup where the actual substrate itself is the filter media. I did consider using a plenum, but it seems too complicated for my needs, so I just kept everything as simple as possible. I'm using the Amtra Polychrome Natural Gravel because it's very cheap where I live, but anything that has a grain size of 4mm or larger should work perfectly. I highly recommend rinsing your gravel multiple times before you add it to your tank because it can contain a lot of dust, and even after washing mine thoroughly, it still did add some clouding to the tank. If you prefer a more colourful substrate, you can try the painted gravels or the tinted glass substrates like the ones from the Hugo Kamishi range, but I just wanted to keep costs as low as possible and went with natural gravel. I know that the plants haven't grown in much yet, but until about 2 weeks ago this was an unheated setup during the winter and early spring, but the plants are coming along nicely since I added a heater to this, so you can grow plants in undergravel filter setups. The gravel in this serves as both biological and mechanical filtration by providing plenty of surface area for beneficial bacteria while also collecting and trapping debris. As I touched on earlier, this particular tank is almost 4 months old now and I haven't needed to do any maintenance on the gravel at all. It's basically been a set and forget system. Now I do have shrimp and snails in this tank that will eat any leftover food or any detritus debris that accumulates on the gravel, but if fish waste or anything that they won't eat ever starts to accumulate, I plan to use a waste-eating bacteria product like Fritzime 360 to clear it. Flow rate will depend on the air pump you use, but piezoelectric pumps like the one I have work perfectly for delicate fish like long-tailed bettas and guppies. There's also no risk to baby shrimp, fish or snails because all of the moving parts on this filter are outside of the tank in the air pump. Overall, undergravel filters are a fantastic, underrated option, and the only real downside I can think of is that your substrate choices are limited. The third type of filter that I'd recommend for a nano tank is the often overlooked and potentially forgotten about box filter, which can work well in smaller setups. These are very cheap, but the media that they come with is questionable, so you may want to pick up some 30 ppi foam and filter floss to customize it. Now you may be wondering why I choose a box filter and then fill it with sponge when you can just buy a sponge filter and be done with it, but the answer is the little plastic box itself because it keeps all of the debris contained when I need to remove it for cleaning. With the sponge filter, a lot of the debris can be released back into the tank when you take it out for cleaning, and it really does annoy me that you have to counter that as well when using that filter type. Box filters are also highly customizable, and I use the one in the video clip with sintered glass media for biological filtration and foam for mechanical filtration. There's even a double box filter available that gives you extra space for media customization, but this one is probably too tall for a nano tank. I've used a few of these in different setups, and you can get mechanical, biological and chemical filtration working in these with ease because of how customizable they actually are. Like other air-powered filters, noise usually comes from the air pump and the bubbles, but like I mentioned earlier, a piezoelectric pump helps to keep things as quiet as possible. Although box filters are slightly larger than sponge filters, the extra room for media customization is a fair trade in my opinion. As I mentioned earlier, they are far easier to do maintenance on than sponge filters as well because they don't release the debris back into the tank when you remove them for cleaning. Again, the flow rate will depend on your air pump, but a piezoelectric pump is plenty for a nano tank, but if you are planning to use the double box filter, you may want a more powerful air pump to run it. And again, with the actual air pump being outside of the tank with all of the moving parts there, there's no risk to your baby shrimp, fish or snails either. Next up are sponge filters, and there's a bunch of different types available, so you shouldn't have trouble finding a one that'll suit your tank. Sponge filters are very cheap, but most of them do require a separate air pump to run, which will increase your overall costs like all other air-powered filters. But again, I do recommend a piezoelectric pump for a nano tank because they are the perfect option in my opinion when it comes to their power and their sound generated. There's also these newer sponge filters that come with a built-in water pump, which means you don't need to go out and get an air pump for it to run. These are great for keeping noise to a minimum, and on top of that they also run on a single USB power slot instead of a traditional plug, which is handy if you have a fish room with multiple tanks and you want to save your power outlets for heaters and lights. One of the main advantages for sponge filters is that they can come in very small compact sizes while still holding the filtration on a nano tank, so it does give you more space for plants and hardscape and other stuff. In my experience, sponge filters do a great job with biological filtration, and it's very easy to get the tank cycled and hold stable ammonia and nitrite levels when using them. However, as I touched on earlier, while sponge filters do offer some mechanical filtration by trapping debris against its surface, that debris can often be released back into the tank when you actually remove the filter for cleaning. Depending on how much debris buildup there is in your tank, this may result in you needing to do a partial water change just to clear out all of the floating particles. This is just one of the many reasons that I prefer box filters over sponge filters, because they keep the debris contained. Now, if you are using the air-powered sponge filter, your flow rate will depend on your air pump just like the other air-powered options, and the moving parts are outside of the tank, so there's no crush risk to baby shrimp, fish and snails. However, if you do choose one of the newer sponge filters with the built-in water pump, there is moving parts in the tank, so technically there is a crush risk to any baby shrimp, fish and snails, but the realistic chances of it happen are questionable. I also want to talk about using live plants as a form of filtration in nano tanks, whether they are part of a support system for your main filter or the primary filtration method for the tank. I know that plants can be expensive, especially if you're adding several different varieties to your tank, but a single pot of a floating plant like salvinia can be a quick and cheap way to improve water quality. I do think that salvinia is an excellent middle ground choice when it comes to plants for filtration because it's easy to care for, it's easy to maintain, and it does offer some decent natural water purification. This lets it work very well in a support capacity when assisting one of the other filters that I covered earlier in the video. But my pearlweed jungle tank has never had a traditional filter on it ever, and all of the filtration in that tank comes from the pearlweed plant that just grows and grows and grows. I also want to point out that all of the pearlweed in this tank came from one single pot that I put into the tank and just left to grow, so it keeps costs down. Since plants have no moving parts, they have no noise generation, so it makes them a silent way to boost your tank's filtration. Depending on the specific species you choose, your plants can take up a lot of space, but that space can usually become shelter for fish, helping shy or nervous species feel safe and secure in your nano tank. In terms of filtration, most fast-grown plants are excellent options to support biological filtration and keep toxic nitrogen compounds out of the water. Once biofilm starts to form on the plant leaves, they can also trap some particles, offering a little bit of mechanical filtration, but it's nowhere near as effective as filter floss. Maintenance depends on the specific plant species you choose, but that's another reason I recommend Salvinia as a support filtration plant because it's very easy to control. You can simply scoop the excess plants off the surface of your tank with ease using your hand when needed, and this isn't a realistic option with some other floating plants like duckweed. Plus, unlike a lot of filters, plants pose no risk to baby shrimp, snails and fry, and instead they provide natural hiding and grazing areas for them to grow. I understand that adding plants does add a little bit more of a learning curve if you are new to the hobby, but even something as simple as one floating plant like Salvinia can make a difference in how safe and stable your water parameters are in your nano tank. Here's some B-roll of my fish while I briefly touch on internal filters because I feel like the video won't be complete without at least mentioning them, but I don't personally use them in my tanks. There are some cheap internal filters on the market that can work well in nano tanks, and I do know a lot of people prefer them over the other filtration options. In general, internal filters are quiet when running and they can do a decent job of keeping your water parameters safe and stable for your fish. The main reason I'm not a big fan of internal filters is that a lot of the space they take up inside your tank is usually the casing and the motor rather than the actual filter media. Because of that, I do tend to lean more towards the other filtration options because they just work better for the specific types of tank that I create. That said, your setup may have different needs and an internal filter could still be the best option for your nano tank. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. I just wanted to publish something specific to nano filters for the smaller tanks because there doesn't seem to be much out there specific to this tank size. I hope the video has been helpful, thanks for watching and have a good day.